in a completely unrelated area, but I've had almost a lifelong interest in economics, and I studied that through school and into university, but sort of fell out of love with it, I suppose. I kind of dropped out of economics at university, but yeah, maintained an interest in that. And then I also came across the Austrian School of Economics, and I found that to be particularly eye-opening. And it led me down this path of asking that question of what is money. And as we've already mentioned, gold plays such an important role in that. And I think that understanding gold is the first step to understanding Bitcoin. And so, in the last couple of years, I've sort of turned back to filmmaking and trying to link that interest to Austrian economics and Bitcoin. And last year, I sort of set myself a goal for a project to make a film related to Bitcoin, and it had two particular parameters. One was that I wasn't allowed to spend $1, and it had to cost $0, and the other thing was I wasn't allowed to leave my desk. So I sort of basically put this thing together using content that had already been created by people, working in Bitcoin and talking about Bitcoin. And the film's called Hard Money. It's available free online. So that's sort of been my contribution, I suppose. But I'm more interested in the philosophy of money, the history of money, and in particular the phenomenon of inflation, and the way that links to things like time preferences, as we've already talked about. And also, I suppose, political philosophy and libertarianism, and these ideas that there's a certain way of thinking in Austrian economics called praxeology, which is about human action and the way that really analyzing the way that people sort of pursue. It's very general in the way that they use means to pursue ends. Like that's the very first kind of axiom of the system, and from that we can draw a whole lot of deductions. And it's interesting the way that leads you down an ethical, being able to create an ethical framework as well. And that's where I guess your own work came into it, where, I found myself interested in this libertarian system of ethics or morals, and, Maps of Meaning, I think is essentially a book about morality as well, in that it's a book about how to act. So I found some very interesting parallels there.
And what was it about? How would you define the Austrian School of Economics, and why was it of particular interest to you?
Well, the Austrian school is, I would say, it's a way of thinking that is about logical deduction rather than empiricism. I think the problem with economics in its current form, influenced by the work of John Maynard Keynes, I think it has a problem where it has this desire to imitate a physical science. It wants to analyze data, get complex in a mathematical sense. But there's a fundamental problem there in that when you're trying to analyze something in economics, we can't set up an experiment and, run a test on a parallel universe. We're dealing with real world. You can't isolate the independent variables, basically. So it makes that kind of analysis fraught with a lot of danger. Whereas the
behavioral economists are trying to deal with that to some degree, right? By running actual economic experiments. They're more like psychologists. They are psychologists fundamentally.
And the Austrian school takes a very different approach, which is to say, we'll take a certain set of fundamental axioms, and then we'll build our philosophy based on logical deduction. So it's sort of all done from the armchair, basically, rather than trying to validate anything via real world data.
I guess the relationship between action and economics and value, I suppose, is that people choose to act in relationship to those things that they value, and that the manner in which they act is actually an indication of what they value. And so money becomes an index of people's value preferences, and value preferences associated with their preferences for action. I mean, that shapes even such things as perception, right? Because perception, we think about that as something that's automatic, essentially, because the world just appears to us in some sense. But you move your eyes constantly and you orient your head so that you can hear one thing rather than another, and you pay preferential attention to one thing rather than another. And you do all of that as a consequence of comparative value. And I was reading a book on Austrian economics last night, and they were talking about trying to define economics. And it struck me that the most suitable definition was something like the science of comparative value. It looks like that's what economists concentrate on. And then money becomes an index of comparative value. And then that leads, well, I'm going to talk to Robert next. I'll get him to introduce himself. But I know Robert has written a fair bit philosophically on the implications of money in general as a signal of value, and of Bitcoin in particular. So, Robert.
Hey, Jordan. My name is Robert Breedlove. It's a great honor to speak with you today. I'll just say that your work has had a profound impact on my life that I'd probably struggle to put into words, so I'll just leave it at thank you. I'm a lifelong student of philosophy and economics, although more recently, thanks to Bitcoin, I actually was introduced to Austrian economics. So I've been going down that rabbit hole for the past 4 years. My background before that is I have a master's degree in accounting and finance. I was a CPA for a number of years. So I did tax strategies for high net worth individuals, investment partnerships. From there, I moved on to be pretty much a career CFO focused in technology. And then most recently, I was operating a hedge fund before. Last year, 2020 was transformative for a lot of us. And this quote from H.G. Wells really struck me and resonated. He said that civilization is a race between education and catastrophe. And my realization is that the world is so poorly informed about the socioeconomic significance and even philosophic significance of Bitcoin that it was incumbent upon me to take what I think I see as the solution to many problems in the world and just pour all my energy into education. And to that end, I started the What is Money show. I called it this because I do believe that question, what is money? This is the gateway to this rabbit hole that we've all fallen down. It is the key to unlocking a lot of the untruths in the world. And I think it's also the key to perceiving the corruption that's embedded in our current socioeconomic system, at the core of which is central banking, which I'm sure we'll get into a lot today. I would just, to echo a couple of the things that were mentioned earlier, that question, what is money, has a lot of answers. One of which, as I think you've related in the past, is that money is essentially a contract with the future. And today, fiat currency, it's a violated social contract. So we have a money by which an institution effectively robs our future. They're compelling the demand for this money, and they're violating its supply to enrich themselves and dispossessing everyone else, mostly people economically vulnerable. And to the point about morality, it's like if we don't have a secure social contract in the most important market in the world, which is money, then we can't possibly have a foundation for a sound social morality. So it causes